Good evening, members. Good evening. Prayers this evening will be said by the Reverend Ian Parish.
In light of the recent atrocities, my prayer tonight is that we might live in peace and be more attentive to each other, to focus our attention not on evil or acts of brutality, but in acts of goodness and kindness within our society. We think especially tonight of those affected by the recent terror attacks on Westminster, Dortmund, and the chemical attacks in Syria. We pray for peace for the injured, peace for the bereaved, and peace for everyone who is afraid today because of such atrocious activity. We pray for peace in the United Kingdom and peace around our troubled world. And we especially pray at this time for the innocent men, women and children and friends and family of PC Keith Palmer, Asher Fraid, Kurt Cochran, Leslie Rhodes and Andrea Christie. And also for Khalid Masood, who, being misguided in his faith, not only took the lives of innocent people, but wasted his own. Give guidance to the Prime Minister, Theresa May, her Cabinet and Foreign Office, and to the local councils who must seek to establish peace and social cohesion and at the same time be clear in their response to such atrocities. Strengthen us, Lord, we pray, in our democratic beliefs in freedom, tolerance of others, accepting personal and social responsibility, respecting and upholding the rule of law, and working together for the common good of our kingdom. We also pray for leaders across Europe and around the world, as together we faced increased aggression and tension in all of our debates. Guide our council and our nation through the inspiration of our faith, that we might gain a deeper understanding of each other's needs and put an end to conflict and aggression. And finally, Lord, give us grace to rebuild bonds of trust, so that together we might work for the dignity and flourishing of all, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Members, these proceedings will be webcast and recorded by the Council, but will anyone else be recording or filming them? I ask so that people at the meeting will know if this will be happening.
Point of information. What happened to the President? What happened to our organised strike nation? 99% of our roads taken from us disabled. First line. What happened to our toilet? All taken away.
Will you please sit down? Shall I suspend it? Mr. Ravery, will you please sit down, or else I'll have to ask for the meeting to be suspended. Thank you very much. Thank you. Members, I've received apologies for absence from Councillors Clark, Mrs Grigg, Hemsley, B. Mortimer, D. Mortimer, Newton's here, isn't he? Oh, Newton, J. Sams, T. Sams and Wilby, and Councillor Mrs Ring and Councillor de Wigenden. Perhaps I should have asked who's here. Are there any applications for dispensations?
I can confirm that there have been no applications for dispensations.
Members, are there any disclosures of disclosable pecuniary interests or other significant interests by members? Are there any disclosures by officers?
No, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any disclosures of lobbying? Is it agreed that the items on the agenda be taken in public as proposed? Thank you. Agenda item 7. Are the minutes of the meeting of the Borough Council held on the 1st of March 2017 agreed as a correct record? Councillor Bryce.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There was just a... Sorry, apologies. There was just a small note on page 15 that the 3 items under point 113 were actually taken separately when we voted, and it was, I think, on the latter point that the dissent was to be noted, but I'm not sure if that's entirely clear from the minutes, so if that could be noted, I'd be most grateful.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Councillor and Mrs Price. That will be amended. Members, agenda item 8. This is the Mayor's announcements. Mayor's announcements, the 12th of April 2017. I have had the good fortune and honour to be able to represent Maidstone Borough Council at 2 events at the Nepalese Embassy in London during the last few weeks. These events were to commemorate 200 years of friendship and collaboration between the British and Nepalese. On the first occasion, His Royal Highness Prince Richard, the Duke of Gloucester, was present, and on the second occasion, His Royal Highness Prince Henry of Wales, or more commonly known as Prince Harry, was present. The two nations have enjoyed great alliance during these last 200 years, and I hope that this friendship and collaboration will continue for many years in the same vein. We in Maidstone have enjoyed the Nepalese and Gurkha presence in the town. They are great ambassadors for their country. I would like to thank the Deputy Mayor and Deputy Mayoress, Councillor Malcolm Greer and Mrs Brenda Greer, for standing in for me on a number of occasions. And I also thank the Leader of the Council, Councillor Mrs Fran Wilson, who also stood in for me and welcomed the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, into the borough and received from him a framed blessing for Maidstone, which is hanging by the Mayor's Parlour in the Town Hall. My wife Mary and I, we both completed the fire walk, which was to raise funds for the Heart of Kent Hospice. I did not take on the ice walk, and I've not attempted to walk on water. I'll leave that to others. Needless to say, it was a great experience, but we did have dirty feet. This morning, I was privileged to be able to officially open the Maidstone Link. Maidstone Borough Council, Citizens Advice Bureau and Job Centre Plus have joined together creating this innovative Maidstone Link. It's an impressive idea and a great place to work in, and pleasant surroundings both for the staff and their clients. I would like all councillors to visit the Maidstone Link and to witness what has been achieved, and I believe there will be a morning set aside for councillors to visit sometime in June. Last evening, I had the good fortune to be invited by Maidstone Scouts to the Maidstone Gang Show. This was at the Hazlitt Theatre. I thoroughly enjoyed myself, and we are blessed with such a wealth of talent in Maidstone. The show continues up until Saturday the 15th of April, and I guarantee that if you attend, you will have a great time. It was difficult to stop laughing. I also have an event on Saturday the 15th of April at the Gallagher Stadium, which is an initiative to help raise funds for helping homeless people. I will be at the Maidstone United Football Ground at 1 o'clock to officially open the event, and you're all welcome to attend. It is sad that when you consider that 100 years ago there was the First World War, And it would appear that nothing has been learned when you see what has happened in recent days or weeks in Syria and beyond. I can say, though, that during my time as Mayor of Maidstone, I've only come across kind and good people. I call upon Councillor John Perry, who would like to say a few words, I believe concerning events at Vimy Ridge. Councillor John Perry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, members. Last year, a number of us attended a commemoration for the 100th anniversary of the Battle of the Somme, which was very movingly presented by Councillor Daly and Councillor Mrs Wilson. I realised that with something as significant as the First World War, there will be many occasions for remembrance. But tonight I want to pay special tribute to an event that remains very important for the nation concerned. Exactly 100 years ago today, almost to this very hour, the Canadian Corps captured the Vimy Ridge, just outside the town of Arras in northern France. Vimy Ridge was one of the most important strategic positions on the Western Front. But perhaps even more importantly, its capture had a huge symbolic effect on Canada's identity as a nation. It has been stated that nations are made by doing great things together. And this was a great thing, which came to symbolise Canada's coming of age. The Canadian Corps suffered over 10,000 casualties during the 4-day assault on Vimy Ridge, winning 4 Victoria Crosses in the process. We must, above all, never forget the sacrifice made by men and women of the Commonwealth, who came from all corners of the globe to defend the freedom we all enjoy today. As a postscript, my great-uncle Jack served with the Royal Winnipeg Rifles and took part in the assault and capture of Vimy Ridge. Thank you, Mr Mayor and members, for allowing me to make this statement.
You're very welcome. Thank you. I hear that Councillor Mike Revel has resigned as a councillor for personal reasons. I would like to wish him best wishes and thank him for his time spent as a borough councillor. Members, agenda item 9, petitions. There are no petitions this evening. Agenda item 10 is the question and answer session for members of the public. And I have received notification that Mr Paul Billaney wishes to ask a question of the Chairman of the Policy and Resources Committee. Mr Billaney, can you come forward, please? No, I'm sorry, if he's not here, we'll have to move on. I've received notification that Tobe Hayden-Lay wishes to ask a question of the Chairman of the Policy and Resources Committee. Tobe Hayden-Lay.
I hope it's directed.
Can you press the button, please?
Yeah, I think it is. Hello? Testing. Right, yeah, I hope it's directed at the right department. It's in relation to council tax. Is it not the case that every single local council is mandated under statute to issue legal proceedings for the immediate recovery of all unpaid council tax bills?
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Wilson.
Right, I think I'm on. Thank you for your question. This and other councils in their role as billing authority are required to collect council tax payable in respect of dwellings situated in their area, and the processes that follow in the event of non-payment are set out in statute. This is why I have to read it, because it's a very precise statute. Council Tax Administration and Enforcement Regulations 1992. With a decision as to when to issue legal proceedings taken by the Council.
Does any other group leader or representative present like to respond? Tobe Hayden-Lay, would you like to ask a supplementary question?
Yes, please. A supplementary question is this. What is the consequence for the council if it does not issue such recovery proceedings? Is it in fact that you, the council, are liable to the Crown for the unpaid council tax?
Thank you. We'll be turning into a double act with this. Frankly, I don't know the precise answer, so I'll get a written response to you and make sure that it is sent to every councillor here. And would the officers please make a note that that is done, please? Unless you have the answer ready, Mrs. Broom.
We're not responsible to the Crown.
Do you know the legal definition of extortion?
Thank you, Ms. Tobe. That's the end now. Thank you.
Was that the final answer to that question? You're not responsible to the Crown? Sorry, just to clarify that.
That's correct. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would still think it preferable if we give you a written answer as well, and that will go to all councillors.
Thank you very much.
Members, agenda item 11, questions from council members. And I've received notification that Councillor Harper wishes to ask a question of the Chairman of Strategic Planning, Sustainability and Transportation Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the Chairman of the Strategic Planning, Sustainability and Transportation Committee confirm that the former Astor of Hever Meadows are not designated as a site for housing in the emerging local plan, and would as a consequence any proposals for the development of the site for housing be turned down?
Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Harper, I was a little concerned you might have misplaced your copy of the local plan, but when I bumped into you earlier, you do assure me that you still have it. But as you'll be well aware, the land at Astor of Hever School, Oakwood Park, is not allocated in the emerging borough local plan. And also, I think we should be further encouraged that to date the local plan inspector has not indicated that further housing sites will be needed to be added into the plan. If a planning application were submitted to this council, it would need to be determined in accordance with the adopted local plan policies in place at the time, and also take into account any other planning matters which could point in favour of or against consent being granted. All relevant planning matters would rightly be considered in full at the time of the application and cannot be prejudiced now.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Councillor Harper, do you wish to ask a supplementary question of the Chairman of Strategic Planning, Sustainability and Transportation Committee arising out of your original question or the reply?
No.
Have I lost it? Has he got another question? Councillor Harper, you've got another question though.
Yeah. Sorry, I'd hoped that all these questions obviously have to be answered by David Burton. I was hoping we might have been able to spread them around a bit. But anyway, so can the Chairman of the Strategic Planning, Sustainability and Transportation Committee please confirm the planning status of the Oakwood Park playing fields? Are residents correct to assume that they are safe from development?
Councillor Burton.
Again, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, it's almost the same question for a different site, so perhaps it is appropriate it comes to the same person. The Oakwood Park playing fields have no specific designation in either the adopted Maidstone borough-wide local plan or the emerging borough local plan. Policy DM22 of the emerging plan covers publicly accessible open space and recreation and sets out the considerations which will apply if development is proposed, which would result in the loss of such a space. Like for the earlier question, all relevant planning matters would be considered in full at the time of any application.
Councillor Harper, do you wish to ask a supplementary question?
Just a short one, and it might, in respect of Oakwood Park and perhaps Astor of Hever, I don't know whether within the planning process there's any scope to designate these types of spaces and other spaces such as these as, you know, green spaces to give them further protection.
Councillor Burton?
I think I'm going to refer in part to my earlier answer that policy DM22 does actually seek to put in place precisely those considerations and those protections that would be necessary.
Thank you. Councillor Harper, another question?
Yep, the final one for tonight, you'll be pleased to know. There are considerable problems with the Medway towpath cycle route in its section in the town centre. The Maidstone Cycle Campaign Forum has had discussions with Kent County Council officers on this. The issues relate to the section from Medway Street to Loch Meadow, which have dangerous blind spots both for pedestrians and cyclists. As the council has invested £500,000 into the scheme, can the chairman of the Strategic Planning, Sustainability and Transportation Committee confirm that he will work with the Maidstone Cycle Campaign Forum and Kent County Council to try to resolve these issues?
Councillor Burton?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes. I won't leave it quite as brief as that. I'd be very happy to meet with you, the Cycling Forum, to look at the matter in detail to make sure that nothing is being missed. Perhaps we could arrange that after this meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Councillor Harper, do you have any supplementary to that?
No, I'd just like to thank the council very much for, helping to arrange to look into the issue, and I'll be in touch ASAP to arrange a meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, agenda item 12 is the current issues. The report of the Leader of the Council. Councillor Mrs Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the last meeting of this municipal year, but I don't think any of you want a long State of the Nation type address. So I'll pick out a few things that I think are important, because this council has achieved a lot this last year, and particularly in the realms of homelessness, the work that both councillors and officers have done, I think, has been amazing. We're well on the way to acquiring the properties that we agreed we needed, and this council does take it extremely seriously. And the reason I'm saying this is because I've been a little bit depressed at some of the press which seems to imply that we do nothing, when in actual fact this council is working its socks off to try and help people who find themselves homeless for whatever reason. So we have achieved a lot there. I'd also like to mention the issue of flooding, because at the end of the year, when I was asked what I wanted as a primary thing to see happen this year, I said I really don't want to see this council go into another year, and we still haven't appeared to move forward on that issue. So I'm pleased to say that a report will be coming to PNR at the next meeting with an interim updated report, because we do now have the assessment from the independent assessors that we went to. I've asked that the report doesn't just cover Yalding, Collier Street and Marden, because somebody always asks the question about what is happening in the town centre, and I like to remind people that there's a little bit of land, funnily enough, between Yalding, Collier Street, Marden and the town centre, namely called Tovel, and that bits around it, like Barming, for example. So we have moved forward on that. Maybe not as much as all of us would like, but we have moved forward. And the other two major things, I think, were the acquisition of the sorting office area at Maidstone East and the fact that we did complete the purchase of Gabriel's Hill, because those were not easy to achieve, and councillors had quite a lot to do with that. Looking forward, I'm very concerned that the local plan is going through, and I have not changed my mind that it was the right thing to get the local plan to the inspector as quickly as possible. I don't think that anyone here was 100% happy with it, but not having an approved local plan, to my mind, is still far, far worse than actually having a local plan. Having said that, I am concerned that there are signs that some of it's already being compromised, and we need to make sure that we are really robust in this council in the way we deal with people who infringe things. For instance, the ripping out of hedges is not acceptable. The fact that people don't follow the landscape designs that we've requested are not acceptable. And we really do have to protect. We need the homes. I mean, we've really got to put a clear message out that people need homes and we need jobs. But the third bit is that we need a decent place to live in. And so I am putting out a message that I hope all councillors will support me in, that we really have to be robust now in the way that we deal with infringements. And I think the message has been made by many councillors here that that means that we have to have a really good enforcement team who have the time and the energy and the wherewithal to deal with these issues. There's one last thing I want to say. This council used to have a document that officers and councillors worked to. It was called the Landscape Character Assessment, and it was seen as an exemplar, not just for this council and in Kent, but nationally. It was deemed to be an excellent document. I don't know why it was kicked into touch, but we managed to unearth one in the back of a cupboard. The director now has it to look at, and I have asked that we should reintroduce it, even if it needs updating. No doubt it probably will need updating. But I've asked if we can reintroduce it, because it was a very, very clear guide to councillors, officers and developers about what sort of planting, for example, you could put where, and what was the special characteristic of each different area. Quite a big document, but nevertheless you could take out the relevant page and work to it, and my time's running out, so I'm hoping that I'm going to get some support for asking that that comes back. Thank you all, and good luck to those who are involved with elections, although I don't quite know where they are this year.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Wilson. I now call upon the other group leaders to respond. Each of you have 5 minutes. So, Councillor Mrs Blackmore, the leader of the Conservative group.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I'd like to pick up on a few things that Councillor Mrs Wilson has mentioned. I think homelessness for all of us breaks our heart. We wouldn't want to think that anyone was homeless at any time. Having said that, I think the fact that we have introduced our regeneration and housing strategy has given us the opportunity to make purchases throughout the borough to actually stem the rising tide. And I do think that the progress that we're making has gone beyond my expectations, and I really do think officers deserve a pat on the back for that, because it was long overdue. As to flooding, well, my ward is closely affected, as many know, and there is a report coming to PNR in 2 weeks' time, actually. I'm not certain it's going to provide all the answers that everyone wants, but I think the update that it will give should be useful at that point in time. Purchase the Royal Mail sorting office, I think that's going ahead, fantastic. All we need now are some tenants for the buildings, a master planning, and off we go. And let's hope that the other funny building up the road agree with everything that we think should go there. But we'll wait for that one. You mentioned the purchase of Gabriel's Hill. I think you mean Granada House, because I don't think we've bought all of Gabriel's Hill. This isn't Monopoly, but you never know. Let's be ambitious. Let's be ambitious and go for all of Gabriel's Hill. The only thing I'd like to say about the local plan is I think it's fraught with difficulties. We're on a path. I think the path is a reasonably good one, but there's no doubt we're going to kind of wiggle off here, there and everywhere. But I think the way it's going to stay together and not derail is if everybody works together, whether that's councillors, whether that's the parish councillors, planners, developers, whoever. I actually think instead of pitting ourselves against each other, we've now got to have a closer sense of unity, because it's only when we do that with the difficult sites that I think we can overcome the problems. Your words about enforcement are music to my ears, and I'm sure it was about 5 weeks ago in this very chamber that I put forward the idea of an enforcement fund. At least I think it was here, or maybe that was a dream, or maybe that was, I don't know, a parallel universe that I exist in. So here we are. We're sitting here saying we want to undertake enforcement where we have breaches because a hedge has been ripped out. We wanted to set money aside because we know there are other issues across the borough, and yet we were thwarted. So I do feel it's slightly disingenuous, but I'm really pleased that you agree with us that that is what we should be doing. That enforcement is incredibly important across the borough. So I will leave it at that. For those who are standing in the elections, wish you the best of luck. It's actually quite nice to have a little bit of time off at this time of year. And all I can say is, well, borough-wise, no, I'm talking about borough, not Kent County Council. I mean, at the end of the day, which is more important, the borough or the county council? As far as I'm concerned, it's the borough. And as a borough councillor, I'm absolutely right on that one, Councillor English. So, for those of you who might be standing in the Kent County Council elections, I wish you well. I hope that you don't wear out too much shoe leather, and I'll see you on the doorsteps.
I now call upon Councillor Mrs Gooch, the leader of the Independent Group. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mr Mayor. You know, it's always very difficult to follow the leader and the leader of the Conservative group as well, because they always speak so eloquently and they say things and I think, oh, I wanted to say that. So can I just pick up on something that the leader said, and that's Councillor Mrs Fran Wilson. And you referred to the landscape character assessment. Can I formally say on behalf of the Independent Group that we totally agree this is it really was a very, very good document. I do believe that, was it Councillor Harwood that was the one person who read it from cover to cover? I think I'm right in saying that, because I remember you saying it at the time at one of the workshops, and I felt totally ashamed of myself because I hadn't. But I do agree, it does need updating, and all of us fully back you there. Or two of us. I know, look, enforcement, I know it's a hot potato, but may I remind everybody, we do have a budget, we are having a planning review, and we've got to be very careful as to what we commit ourselves to. I do think that we've achieved so much this year, being a hung council, and I've said it before and I say it again, we do work well at the end of the day. Yes, we have our disagreements behind the scenes. I know we do, and we will never agree on everything, but at the end of the day, we all are working together for the benefit of this borough. And I'd like to thank everybody for the work that they do, because we know that we all work together for Maidstone. We've got the delivery of the local plan, and it'll be even more important that we stick together, as Councillor Blackmore said, that we stick together and try to make it happen. Well done, everybody, and I will not forget members of staff. We couldn't have done all this without our members of staff supporting us and making the recommendations that sometimes we tickled a bit and amended and didn't go with. But well done, everybody, and I think we've had a good year, and let's look forward to the next year.
Thank you very, excuse me. Thank you very much, Councillor Mrs. Gooch. I now call upon Councillor Powell, the leader of the UKIP group. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And if it's difficult to follow 2 people, it's even more difficult to follow 3 people. But I'm absolutely certain that Mr. Harper won't have the same problem when it's following 4 people. So, yeah. Sorry, Paul, I had to get that bit in tonight. Yeah. No, I think it's the work that is actually being done on the council at the moment to address the homeless kind of problem is excellent, and I really do take my hat off to the staff there. There's 3 properties that are actually being purchased in the ward that I represent, and the more that we can do in this area, the better, because there's nothing worse than seeing on a December's night somebody in one of these shop doorways. They do tend to congregate more around Maidstone than anywhere else. So the more that we can do. And even if we seem to be doing more than any other borough in Kent, I mean, our homelessness situation is one of the best. But I'm not going to settle for the best until it's all completed and it's all done. And I'm sure that everybody in this chamber would support me on that. In terms of the local plan, well, this has always been one of my pet subjects, and I will support where I think support is needed, but I'm not going to support everything, because I think certain parts, still to this day, and I accept that a decision has been made, is not right. And I think, I've gone on record many a time saying we try to cram too many kind of properties into too many kind of small areas with a lack of infrastructure, but I won't talk about that anymore. The enforcement fund, that always amuses me, because I was told that was against the enforcement fund. That was £50,000 that was decided to be taken out of a museum and put into enforcement. And what I did, I won't go into what I actually kind of said that evening, but I agree with enforcement. It was nearly a year ago where I actually kind of questioned the planning team to find out how many complaints of an enforcement nature have come into the council within the last 12 months. I was told in excess of 800. My supplementary question was, how many of those have been acted upon? And the answer was 0. So that was a major concern. There is a massive budget that can be called upon for these issues ripping out hedges or whatever else. And what I want to see is certainly the officers in charge actually grow a set, excuse the expression, and actually start doing something to some of these developers that once we give permission with set laid down conditions, they go off and do their own thing with nothing ever said, or certainly not knowingly, or certainly as a planning committee, not knowingly, anything ever happens. So, yes, I'm absolutely delighted with everything, except for the issue that we're not actually applying the necessary kind of law or the necessary conditions when we accept and give a planning permission. But above that, I think it's been a very, very difficult year, given the scaling back of kind of various budgets in different places. We've had to work within things. We've had a difficult time over the council tax period, but I think people have been working together. There's been a lot of cross-party support from everybody, and that's encouraging to see that as well, because I think where you get cross-party support, you do get a bit of common sense as well, rather than people just trying to jump in and go their own ways. But thank you to everybody that's made that possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. I now call upon Councillor Harper, the leader of the Labour Group.
Okay, thank you. Well, I note one thing I note is that Labour is the only group here tonight with 100% of all of its councillors. The rest of you should be ashamed. Your people out tonight. Turning to some of the points raised, yes, we all agree on homelessness. The quicker we can get the current work through and the various proposals through and in place, the better, and hopefully we'll then be able to start to look at resourcing to bring further proposals forward. Going to flooding, I think it's good that you're looking at a report which will not just concentrate in the rural areas, but do remember Hart Street in Fant, where there was significant flooding during that period, and it did lead to major problems for the residents of those flats, of which there's about 700 to 800 down there, which did suffer considerable flooding during that period. In terms of the acquisition of the sorting office site, I think we need to use this, and I'm sure the planning officers are looking at this as a real gateway opportunity for Maidstone. It gives us a sort of once-in-a-generation time to actually build something which we can be proud of, rather than some of the carbuncles we've seen, especially down towards the river elsewhere, with the Bog Rolls Hotel and, Asda's and so on, whereas this site could give us something which we can be proud of. And it's, as I say, a once-in-a-generation opportunity. We mustn't lose it. On the local plan, we fully support the local plan, and we are glad that it's very shortly going to be given its final sign-off. And I was very encouraged tonight by Councillor David Burton's answer to my questions, which show the benefit of where the local plan is going to be able to give assurance and comfort to residents in areas where there might be uncertainty, because everything is clearly designated in terms of housing, and especially, as he was saying, that we're not being asked to identify any further housing sites. The one thing with the local plan we must remember, it's not just housing, it is about jobs, as the leader said, and we do, if we're going to have just under 19,000 houses, we assume that there'll be about 20,000 economic active people moving into Maidstone who don't live here now. Those people are going to need jobs. Otherwise, the town will just become a dormitory for London very quickly, and the town centre will continue its long-term decline, which none of us would want. So we do need to think about how we can continue to regenerate our local economy to meet the needs going forward. And linked to that is really the need for infrastructure. Again, we need to make sure, and we've got the infrastructure plan, that these things are implemented. Let's make sure we enforce Section 106 agreements and spend the 106 monies. Planning keeps getting reports showing how far behind we are in getting some of the proposals forward. That gives us the resource to do a lot of it, plus the forthcoming community infrastructure levy when we're able to use that. In terms of the character landscape assessment, I haven't seen it, but I'd imagine that's going to be an excellent document when it will come. And I think the victory we've recently had at Fant Farm, where we got the proposed development thrown out to a large extent in terms of landscape, will prove the benefit of this landscape character assessment being kept up to date and as a comprehensive document for the borough, because we will face challenges on sites similar to Fant Farm elsewhere around the borough. If we have very good landscape assessment studies together with our various policies in the local plan, we should be able to see off these and preserve the best of our environment, the best of our villages and our urban areas. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harper. I will now open up this item to questions from council members for a period of 15 minutes, and the questions must relate to the issues raised by the leader and the other group leaders in their speeches. They will be answered as directed by the questioner and will not require a response from all group leaders. I've had Councillor English indicate.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Firstly, may I say, if you've been at SPST last night, you would have seen an example of cross-party cooperation. I think there was a remarkable number of unanimous votes. May I say, that also on that agenda, and this is a question, don't worry, there was a response from the Council on the planning sections of the Housing White Paper. A very good response. Yes, and you will be aware that in terms of the homelessness issue, the government is consulting on a number of issues in the Housing White Paper which bear directly on homelessness in both aspects. We have homelessness of people who have no housing at all. We have homelessness in people who are in seriously substandard accommodation. And in Maidstone has got quite a lot substandard
English, have you actually got a
accommodation.
question
Yes.
to anyone?
This is important, Mr Mayor, very important to a lot of people. Are we going to have a robust response? And I want the Leader of the Council to assure me that there will be a robust response from this Council on the points in the Government White Paper that will give local authorities more control over the substandard housing market as it affects private sector tenants, in particular in Maidstone, where we all know there are some very bad private sector landlords in Maidstone.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Mrs Wilson.
I suppose the short answer is yes. But I will just say just one other thing. I think this arises from the fact that it looked as though there's only going to be an oral report to the Communities Housing and Environment Committee. I'd already raised this with the Chief Exec to say that clearly it's not just SPS&T, it is both committees that need to discuss it in great detail and make a really robust response. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Wilson. Councillor Garland. Thank you. Councillor Garland.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Your speech earlier is to be welcomed, and given your focus on jobs and investments, on getting the local plan through correctly and getting it agreed by an inspector, and all the extra additional regeneration that you're doing in Gabriel's Hill or looking to do and working with Kent County Council, would you agree with me that you are to be congratulated for continuing with and implementing the policies of the past 7 years of the Conservative administration that preceded you?
Thank you, Councillor Garland. Councillor Mrs Wilson.
The interesting issue here is how many policies the Conservatives continued with that came out of the previous administration to them, and that is the story. That is the story of this council and why it succeeds better than so many other councils that I could name. The fact is that we usually don't do major U-turns. I can think of one occasion when we did, but I will not mention it because it could embarrass you, Chris. But usually we might try and make the ship turn a little bit, but we usually carry on one administration to another, and that is the strength of this council. So I have no problem in saying happy to follow on from what you did, in the same way that Eric was happy to follow on from me, and I followed on from, who was it, Mick, and so it goes. And you know, that's the way the world turns in Maidstone, thankfully.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Wilson. Councillor Garton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Once again, I echo the words of my group leader when we noticed that the Council's leader paid lip service again to planning enforcement tonight. Would the Leader's Party support the Conservative desire to make extra monies available for planning enforcement next year? And moreover, will she support officers in defending planning appeals which seek to overturn democratically taken decisions by the Planning Committee?
Well, let's start at the end by saying that we always support officers in their work to try not to lose planning appeals. And I'm hoping that we can continue to have the high record that we currently have, although sometimes if we make a decision that is clearly not based in planning law, then we may find ourselves unable to win a case, in which case we can expect to find ourselves penalised financially. And that can be very disturbing and not right for the people of this borough to find that we've wasted their money. As far as enforcement goes, I object actually to you saying I pay lip service. I believe strongly in planning enforcement and always have. But we had the money as the spokesperson for the Independents said, we have a review that is currently underway. We insisted that enforcement was a very strong part of what they were looking at, and it makes sense to wait for the outcome. We do have funding available for enforcement anyway, And the issue wasn't whether we didn't support the Conservatives in their desire to have a more robust enforcement. It was that we didn't agree with the way you chose to do it. And that went through the democratic process at both Policy and Resources and full council. And it's the democratic process. There was a majority who thought that what you were proposing and how you wished to do it was not the right way. But I didn't hear a single councillor say that they disagreed with you in the need to get planning enforcement to be robust. And that's what we will seek to achieve as we move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Wilson. Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In the discussion concerning enforcement and how that should be paid for, I would like to ask, really basically, if I am right in thinking that enforcement, generally speaking, will be in pursuance of breach of planning conditions or breach of other conditions which have been imposed before in a legal way, and therefore chasing for enforcement, if they are breach of conditions, they should be actually applied to with a penalty. And if there's a penalty applied, in monetary terms, the more the enforcement, the more the income, and therefore the enforcement should be self-financing. Am I right or wrong in that, please?
So, Councillor Daly, who's that directed to? To Lee. Thank you. Mrs Wilson?
I think the short answer is that when we pursue these cases, we rarely make a profit out of it, sadly. It would be very nice if we could. I think councils up and down the country would agree that it would be lovely if we... Let's put it this way, if we pursue and it's deemed that it is correct, wouldn't it be nice if we could have a really nice penalty put forward and people found themselves well and truly out of pocket? But actually the reality is that normally our costs are covered, hopefully, but we don't make an enormous amount because it just doesn't work that way. I think the most important thing that it does, enforcement, is if you get it in the press. The more the people read in the press that somebody's been caught for something, whether that is planning or whether it is the other issue of fly tipping, for example, because we mustn't forget that there's that as well. The more it's in the press, the more it's seen that we are robust in the way we deal with things, the more impact it has, and that is the key to enforcement.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Wilson. Councillor D. Burton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I am most indebted to Leader of the Council for explaining to me how that works, that the Conservatives set the policies up and then the following administration supports them and then maybe it flips again. So my question to you is that after next year's election, when once again the Conservatives do have a majority of control, and we're again tasked with developing a new future and a further future for Maidstone, would you give us your assistance during that phase as well, and not just take the glory for it when it reverses once again?
Well, actually, I don't recall ever trying to take the glory for anything, because I'm a leader of the council who has responsibility with very little authority to do anything. And I think that is a very difficult balancing act. A very difficult balancing act. As much as I actually agree with you that people shouldn't take credit for things that other people do, and to my knowledge I have never ever done so, and I loathe it when other people do that. And I just think that when we actually get overall control that year, and don't say dream on, the way we're winning by-elections at the moment up and down the country, we could well do it. And we would hope that we would get similar support from you for continuing with the policies that this hung council has put in place in the last 2 years.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Wilson. I've got no one else indicating to speak unless anyone raises their hand now. Not really loud, is
Yeah,
Is he allowed?
it's a new question. It's a new question.
Okay, we'll bear with you.
Mr Mayor, I would want to ask the Leader of the Council whether she would like to actually set the record straight and congratulate the officers who were involved in the enforcement action against Bovis in Hermitage Lane as an example of successful enforcement by this council, in order to rebut the allegation, which is actually quite damaging, that we do not undertake enforcement action, because it's important that people who are likely to infringe know that we do actually take action.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Wilson.
Well, I don't actually think I said that we never won any cases, but I'm very happy to say yes. We have I think actually I did say we have a very high success rate, and actually I did say that. Well, we do enforce, as everybody knows. We have a very good success rate, and long may it continue. And we need to even get better than we currently are, or even though that's excellent.
Right. I've had another request from Councillor Garton.
I believe that the Leaders' Party and Councillor Daly in his representation showed that early on, has a lot of blue-eyed thinking about the costs in enforcement. I never alleged that we do not enforce, but we need to cover the costs and we need to have a budget for that. And it is not permitted to raise fines out of planning enforcement. The press coverage of fly tipping simply does not seem to work. No, I just...
Okay, right. We're going to move on to agenda item 14. And I call upon Councillor Barnett to move the recommendations of the Communities, Housing... You found my deliberate mistake. Sorry, members. Agenda item 13, the Democracy Committee, the 8th of March 2017. I call upon Councillor Boughton to move the recommendation of the Democracy Committee relating to changes to the Constitution.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll try and keep this brief, unlike some. I'll move the recommendations on page 19 of the agendas in front of us.
Is that seconded? Councillor Mrs Blackmore. Members, is this recommendation agreed? Thank you. Now, agenda item 14. I call upon Councillor Barnett to move the recommendations of the Communities, Housing and Environment Committee, acting as the Crime and Disorder Committee, relating to the adoption of the 2013-18 Community Safety Partnership Plan, refresh, and the 2017-18 Strategic Assessment for implementation by the Safer Mason Partnership and its priority subgroups. Councillor Barnett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll move the recommendation on page 22.
Members, is that seconded? Councillor Perry. Is the recommendation agreed? Thank you. Members, agenda item 15, the oral report of the Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee. There is no report. Why have I gone straight to 17? Agenda item 16, the oral report of the Strategic Planning, Sustainability and Transportation Committee, held on the 11th of April 2017. There's no report. So, members, I declare the meeting closed, but may I remind members to take their envelopes with them.